Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're grappling with a really intriguing question from Michel Foucault's 1970 lecture, The Discourse on Language. He asks, quite simply, what matter who's speaking? Seems casual, right? But the implications, well, they're huge.
They really are. It sounds so simple, but Foucault isn't, he's not just asking about who wrote what.
No.
He's pushing us to see how society has set up these massive, often invisible ways to control language, to limit it, to make certain kinds of speech rare even. That's our goal today. Uncovering how discourse, which we often think is free, is actually about power.
And Foucault kicks this off with something quite personal, doesn't he? He talks about his own anxiety, his reluctance about just starting to speak.
Yes, that initial anxiety is key.
Yeah.
He connects his personal feeling, that hesitancy, to a bigger societal unease with language itself. Because if discourse is potentially endless, chaotic, how do we manage it?
How do we stop it from just being noise?
Exactly. That unease mirrors the need for control. And Foucault insists, to study this control, we can't just look at grammar or signs. We need to look at discourse as actual events, as practices, things that happen subject to rules.
So we're looking at what stops speech, not just what makes it possible.
Precisely. We're looking at the constraints.
Okay, let's unpack this. If society is nervous about uncontrolled talk, Foucault points to some, well, very solid walls. What are these external systems? The ones that limit who gets to talk and about what?
Right. Foucault outlines three main external systems. These operate from sort of the outside.
The first one feels the most obvious. Simple prohibitions, like taboos.
Exactly. Taboos are a big part of it. Think about the rules around talking about, say, sex or politics. Very clear lines, often. But it's also about the ritual, where and how you speak, and crucially, the right to speak. Who has permission?
So it's not just what you can't say, but how you have to say it and if you're even allowed.
Yes. Take medicine. A doctor speaking in a clinic that's regulated discourse. It follows rituals, requires qualifications.
But me talking about my symptoms with a friend, that's different.
Totally different. Society grants a privileged right to speak on certain topics based on these external institutional things. It makes the authorized speaker a bit rare.
So institutions like medicine or law are gatekeepers. They control who gets the microphone, essentially.
They manage the scarcity of who gets to speak with authority.
Oh, okay. What's the second mechanism? You mentioned it's quite historical for Foucault.
Yes, the division between madness and reason. Historically, the speech of someone deemed mad was often just dismissed.
Treated as meaningless noise?
Pretty much. Or null and void, as he puts it. It just didn't count as part of the legitimate conversation because it didn't follow the rules of reason, of accepted thinking.
So that division itself is a way to exclude voices, to disqualify certain kinds of speech.
A very powerful way, historically. It sets up a boundary based on what's considered rational.
Which leads us to the third one. And this feels like the trickiest one because, well, we value it so much. The opposition between true and false. Foucault calls it the will to truth.
Yeah, this one's profound. Foucault argues that this will to truth, this drive to find the objective truth, isn't some pure, universal human goal we just stumbled upon.
It's not.
He argues it's a huge historical system, especially in the West, really taking shape from the 17th century onwards. It pushes us constantly towards scientific proof, economic data, technical verification.
But hang on, isn't seeking truth good? Necessary, even. How can you say it's a control system? Isn't that a bit cynical?
It sounds cynical, maybe, but that's the core of his challenge to us. He's not saying truth itself is bad or science is pointless. He's saying the will to truth, the system that prioritizes certain kinds of verifiable rational discourse above all else. That system acts as a constraint.
How so?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, this will to truth isn't floating free. It's backed up by massive institutions.
Like universities, publishing.
It's exactly. Education systems, libraries, scientific journals, the whole apparatus. This system gives power to certain types of speech, the ones using data, logic, recognized methods.
And pushes other kinds to the side, like maybe knowledge based on experience or tradition or emotion.
Precisely. Those get devalued, dismissed as subjective or anecdotal or just, not true in the dominant sense. So the system isn't just finding truth, it's deciding what counts as truth and who gets to define it. It masks the power plays involved.
It makes the rules seem objective, like they're just about accuracy.
That's the power of it. When a scientist insists on specific methods, it feels like just good practice. But Foucault says it's also about enforcing the rules of that specific discipline, upholding the will to truth, and potentially excluding other valid ways of knowing.
Wow. Okay, so those are the external barriers, the big fences. Taboo, madness, and this powerful will to truth. They keep certain things out. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because Foucault says the control doesn't stop there. Even inside the walls, for the speech that is allowed, there are still rules, internal systems limiting things.
Yes, internal principles of limitation. These operate within accepted discourse to organize it, classify it, discipline it, to stop it from just exploding into infinite meanings.
And the first of these is the author. But you said it's not really about the person.
Not the flesh and blood author, no. It's the author function. Think of it as a label society puts on a bunch of texts.
A label. What does the label do?
It imposes order. It says these different texts belong together. They have a certain unity, a coherence, maybe a style, because they come from this author.
So it groups things, gives them a boundary, limits how we can interpret them because they supposedly come from one originating mind.
Exactly. It limits the free circulation, the proliferation of meaning. It says this is Shakespeare's meaning, or this is Newton's theory. It anchors interpretation and makes the text manageable, classifiable, stops it from being just free-floating ideas.
Controls the potential chaos by assigning ownership, in a way.
Controls the rarity, yes. It groups discourse into distinct units.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the second internal control? Commentary.
The principle of commentary. This one's fascinating. It's about how we constantly relate new speech back to older foundational texts.
Like religious texts or classic philosophical works?
Or legal codes, or even seminal scientific papers. Commentary is the act of saying something new, but framing it as revealing what was already in the original text.
So finding new meaning in old words, how is that a control mechanism? Seems like it generates novelty.
It does generate apparent novelty, but it does so by mastering chance. Instead of saying something completely unprecedented, completely different, commentary channels new ideas through the old framework. It ensures that thought remains tethered to the established canon. It limits radical difference by constantly saying, see, this idea was actually present in the original all along.
So it keeps things anchored. It prevents discourse from drifting too far from its origins by constantly reinterpreting those origins.
Precisely. It controls the scarcity of truly original texts by making sure the important ideas are the ones that get repeated, re-explained, kept alive within that tradition.
Got it. Okay. Author, commentary, and the third internal system, disciplines. This feels like a big one.
Oh, it is. Disciplines like biology, economics, history, literary studies are powerful systems of control. They don't just define a subject matter.
What else do they do?
They define what counts as a valid statement within that subject. They set the rules for what methods you can use, what objects you can study, what counts as evidence, what kind of propositions are even allowed.
They basically tell you how you have to talk and think to even be considered part of that field.
Exactly. They fix the limits of what can be seriously discussed, what can be considered true within that specific domain. And Foucault has this brilliant example, Gregor Mendel.
The father of genetics. What about him?
Well, his groundbreaking work on heredity, done in the 1860s, was completely ignored for decades, like nearly 50 years.
Well, why? It was correct, wasn't it? Didn't the will to truth want his findings?
Objectively, yes, it was revolutionary. But it didn't fit the discipline of biology at the time.
How so?
Biology then was mainly descriptive, focused on morphology, observation. Mendel came along with mathematics, with statistics, with abstract concepts of factors or genes. His way of formulating the problem, his methods, they were alien to the established biological discourse.
So his work was like speaking the wrong language for that particular club, even though it was accurate.
Precisely. Foucault might call it conceptual monster. It didn't fit the rules, the framework, the accepted way of producing biological truth at that time. It shows disciplines aren't just about knowledge. They're powerful gatekeepers with strict rules for entry and verification.
If you don't play by the discipline's rules, your truth might just be ignored, treated as noise.
It often is. Until the discipline itself shifts, which can take a long time.
That's quite a realization. The very structure of how we organize knowledge acts as a filter, a control on truth itself. So, okay, we've mapped out these systems. External ones. Taboo, madness, truth. Internal ones. Author, commentary, discipline. Foucault's aim seems to be shifting our focus from just meaning to how these rules actually work politically.
Right. He wants to analyze the effects of these systems of rarefaction and control.
So this raises an important question. If discourse is this controlled, power-laden event, How should we actually study it? How do we do this analysis Foucault wants?
Well, he proposes 4 key methodological principles for what he calls a critical analysis, ways to approach discourse differently.
Okay, what's the first one?
Reversal. This means we have to flip our usual thinking.
Flip it how?
Instead of seeing discourse as something abundant, something naturally flowing from speakers, we need to focus on its scarcity. Recognize the negative work of exclusion and limitation. Treat discourse as something produced under constraint, something rare, not freely given.
So look at a political speech not just for what it says, but for what it doesn't say, what had to be left out.
Exactly. Or what rules allowed this person to speak this way. Analyze the constraints that made this specific utterance possible and rare.
Got it. Reversal. What's next?
Discontinuity. We shouldn't assume all discourse is connected, like it's all just variations on some deeper underlying theme or human consciousness.
So treat, say, 18th century medical talk and 21st century economic talk as separate things.
As distinct series of events, operating under different rules, different systems of exclusion. Don't try to force them into one smooth, continuous story. Recognize the breaks, the shifts.
Okay, makes sense. Third principle.
Specificity. This is crucial. We need to see discourse not as just a way of representing the world, like a mirror, but as a practice that actively does things. It imposes meanings, creates categories, has real effects. It's not just talk, it's an action.
So when lawyers create a new legal category, they're not just describing something, they're actually changing social reality through language.
Precisely. Discourse performs work. It shapes the world it talks about.
Powerful idea. And the last one.
Exteriority. This connects the dots. We need to link the internal rules of a discourse, like the rules of a specific scientific discipline, to the external conditions that make them possible and necessary.
So why these rules in this institution at this historical moment? What social, economic, political factors support this particular way of controlling speech?
Exactly. Look outside the discourse itself to understand the conditions of its existence and its effects on society.
So this whole deep dive really boils down to one core idea. Discourse is political. Deeply political.
Absolutely.
Society uses all these rules we've discussed, some obvious, some hidden to control what's said, who says it, and how much power that speech actually has. It's about managing scarcity and maintaining order.
And importantly, these systems aren't ancient history. Foucault stresses they're constantly maintained and modified by institutions we interact with every day.
Like schools, the media.
Education, political organizations, scientific bodies, medical systems. They're all tangled up in producing, distributing, and controlling discourse. He talks about fellowships of discourse.
Right, those sort of closed groups.
Yeah, like professional societies, academic circles, groups that preserve specific ways of talking, specific knowledge, and enforce the rules about who gets in and whose knowledge counts.
We're probably all part of some fellowship of discourse without even realizing it, just by following workplace jargon or academic standards.
We definitely are. Every time you follow a specific format for a report or use the right terminology in a meeting, you're participating. Foucault urges us to move away from thinking about language as just a neutral tool for connection or as stemming from some unified human spirit.
Instead, we need to see the constraints, the power plays.
Yes, recognize that we operate within these systems of control.
Okay, so here's a final thought for everyone listening. If we take Foucault seriously here, if we accept that even the will to truth, our drive for objectivity, is tangled up with power and institutional control, not just pure inquiry, what kinds of discourse in our own lives, the ones that claim to be purely objective or neutral, should we maybe look at with a bit more suspicion? What power might be hiding beneath that surface? That's precisely the question Foucault leaves us to wrestle with, learning to see the power beneath the rationality.
Something to think about. That's all for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.